Today, we're going to focus on the systems considered so risky, so potentially harmful, that they're simply banned outright. Think of it as the no-go zone for AI. We'll be exploring what constitutes unacceptable risk, and we'll examine several specific practices that fall under this category. These are the practices that the EU deems a clear threat to fundamental rights and safety. We're talking about things that could significantly impact your life, your freedoms, and your well-being. First, let's define unacceptable risk in the context of the EU AI Act. It's not just about things that are slightly problematic. It's about AI systems that pose a clear and significant danger to fundamental rights. Things like the right to privacy, the right to non-discrimination, the right to freedom of expression, and the right to human dignity.
The Act identifies specific AI practices that are deemed to inherently carry this unacceptable risk, and because the potential harm is considered so great, these practices are completely prohibited. No ifs, ands, or buts. One of the most prominent examples of a prohibited practice is social scoring. Let's spend some time unpacking what that actually means. Imagine a system run by a government or even a private company that constantly monitors your behavior, your online activity, your purchases, your social interactions, who you associate with, and then assigns you a score. This score then determines your access to various services or opportunities. Maybe it affects your ability to get a loan, to travel, to get a job, or even to access certain social services. This is the essence of social scoring. It's about creating a system of generalized surveillance and control, where your life chances are dictated by an algorithm. The EU AI Act explicitly prohibits social scoring by public authorities or on their behalf. The reasoning is clear. Such systems can lead to unjustified and disproportionate social treatment. They can discriminate against individuals based on factors that are irrelevant or even protected under law. And crucially, they can chill freedom of expression and association because people become afraid of being penalized for their views or their relationships. Let's consider a hypothetical example. Imagine a government implementing a system that assigns a social credit score to every citizen. This score is based on everything from your online comments to your jaywalking tickets. A low score could mean you're denied a loan, restricted from traveling, or even prevented from enrolling your children in certain schools. This is precisely the kind of system the EU AI Act aims to prevent. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that makes sense for governments, but what about private companies? The Act extends the prohibition to situations where a private company's actions might lead to similar outcomes, even if they aren't directly acting on behalf of the government.
For example, imagine a large corporation with a loyalty program. It's not just about points for purchases. This program analyzes your social media activity, your political affiliations, and other personal data to categorize you into tiers. The higher tiers get fantastic benefits, exclusive discounts, priority service, special events. The lower tiers, they face higher prices, limited access, and maybe even outright exclusion. If this categorization leads to discriminatory treatment that's completely unrelated to your actual purchasing behavior, it could very well be considered a prohibited practice. Another major area of prohibition relates to subliminal techniques. This is where things get a little more subtle and perhaps a little more unsettling. The Act prohibits AI systems that use techniques that operate below the level of a person's conscious awareness to materially distort their behavior. And, importantly, this distortion must be in a way that causes or is likely to cause physical or psychological harm. What does that mean in practice? Think about techniques that subtly influence your choices without you even realizing it. It's not about presenting information clearly and letting you decide. It's about manipulating your subconscious to get you to do something you wouldn't otherwise do. Let's say an advertising company uses AI. This isn't just any AI. It's a system that analyzes vast amounts of data to find subtle visual or auditory cues. These are cues so subtle that you don't consciously register them, but they influence your behavior. They're embedded in advertisements, designed to make you more likely to buy a product, even if you don't need it, or even if it's harmful to you.
This could be a prohibited use of AI, especially if it leads to things like financial harm or addiction, or consider a mobile game. It uses AI to personalize your gaming experience. That sounds good, right? But this AI is subtly adjusting the difficulty, the rewards, even the timing of notifications, all designed to exploit your psychological vulnerabilities. The goal? To get you to spend more and more money on in-app purchases. If this manipulation leads to significant financial problems or even psychological harm, it crosses the line into a prohibited practice. The Act is particularly concerned with AI systems that exploit the vulnerabilities of specific groups, like children, the elderly, or people with disabilities. These groups may be more susceptible to manipulation, and the Act provides extra protection for them.
Now let's move on to a particularly sensitive area: real-time remote biometric identification. This is a fancy way of saying things like facial recognition used in real time in public spaces. Imagine cameras everywhere, constantly scanning faces and identifying people. The EU AI Act generally prohibits the use of this technology in publicly accessible spaces for law enforcement purposes. The potential for mass surveillance and the chilling effect on freedom of assembly and expression are simply too great. However, and this is very important, there are strictly defined exceptions. These exceptions are narrow and carefully crafted to balance the need for security with the protection of fundamental rights. One exception is when the technology is used to search for specific victims of crime.
For example, if a child goes missing, law enforcement might be permitted to use real-time facial recognition in a limited area based on credible information about the child's potential location. But even in this case, there are strict safeguards and oversight requirements. Another exception is to prevent a specific, substantial, and imminent threat to life or safety. Think of a situation where there's credible intelligence about a planned terrorist attack. Law enforcement might be allowed to use facial recognition at a specific location, like a transportation hub, to identify potential suspects. Again, this is subject to very strict conditions and oversight. A third exception involves identifying suspects of serious crimes. If there's concrete evidence linking someone to a serious crime, and other investigative methods have been exhausted or are insufficient, real-time biometric identification might be permitted, but again, under strict judicial oversight and with necessary safeguards.
The key takeaway here is that the general rule is prohibition. The exceptions are narrow, specific, and subject to rigorous controls. It's not a free-for-all. The Act emphasizes necessity and proportionality. The use of this technology must be absolutely necessary to achieve a legitimate aim, and it must be proportionate to the threat or the crime being investigated. Let's contrast two scenarios. In the first, a city deploys a vast network of cameras with real-time facial recognition. They're constantly monitoring everyone, everywhere, tracking their movements, their activities, without any specific suspicion. This is a clear example of prohibited mass surveillance. In the second scenario, law enforcement is searching for a known suspect in a recent bombing. They have credible information that the suspect might be passing through a particular train station. They use real-time facial recognition at that station for a limited time, specifically to look for that suspect. This would likely fall under the permitted exceptions, provided all the necessary safeguards and oversight are in place. So to recap, we've covered the core prohibited practices under the EU AI Act: social scoring, subliminal manipulation, and the general prohibition on real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces, with its carefully defined exceptions. It is also important to know that the Act prohibits AI systems that exploit any of the vulnerabilities of a group of persons due to their age, disability, or a specific social or economic situation. These prohibitions represent the EU's commitment to protecting fundamental rights in the age of artificial intelligence.
There are recognition that some uses of AI are simply too dangerous, too intrusive, too prone to abuse to be allowed. Understanding these prohibitions is crucial for anyone developing, deploying, or using AI systems within the EU, or even for systems that might impact EU citizens. The consequences of deploying a prohibited AI system can be severe, including hefty fines and reputational damage. In the next lesson, we'll move down the risk pyramid to explore high-risk AI systems, those that aren't banned outright, but are subject to significant regulations and requirements.